Welcome back to Overexposed, where I'm going to do my best impression of a human highlighter, and we're going to talk about 5 weird cameras. The first camera on the list came out the year before I was born, in the year of our Lord, 1987, and that was the Kyocera Samurai X3. I think it's pretty safe to say that the 1980s was the decade of the camcorder. At first, the big camcorder that you put up on your shoulder, but eventually the smaller handy cams that we came to know and love. I mean, I'm too young, I didn't come to know and love them, but some of you guys probably did. But it was this handy cam design that was surely in the minds of the Kyocera developers as they came up with the Samurai X3. Why was this camera called the Samurai? Not real sure, but I can only conclude that it must have been because of Bruce Lee and Jackie Chan. This camera was kind of interesting because it was what we would call today a half-frame camera. It shot 72 images on a normal roll of 36 exposure, 35mm film. Look at some of these images of the Samurai X3, and you can see it was a kind of an attractive package. It was really small, really compact in it, and of course it would be because it was half-frame images. But a really cool aesthetic design, I actually don't mind it too much. I think we need to bring back the Samurai. But the camera actually packed quite a few advanced technological designs into that small form factor, including an awesome standard lens that covered everything from 25 to 75mm with a variable aperture of f3.5 to 7.3. The lens was actually pretty large considering the eventual output was that half frame size, but the lens on the camera did become known as a very good sharp lens. That 25 to 75mm lens, due to that half frame size, did have an effective focal length of 35 to 105. And that f-stop range 3.5 to 4.3 was actually pretty broad considering other point shoots on the market. I'm looking at some of these cameras I've got are like f8, 9, 10, f a million. So despite the funky form factor, the camera was actually able to produce some pretty darn good images. Looks like these days you can grab a Kyocera Samurai off of eBay for about $100. So if you want to relive all of those 1980s fantasies, this camera can be yours. So they're not all that expensive, and most reviews say, like I said, the image quality is pretty good, so that's a weird one. And if you're looking for something a little more substantial, the next camera on the list will certainly do the trick, and that was the Olympus O product. It came out in 1988. I don't know what it is about all these cameras, these strange cameras coming out in the 80s. We must have been going through some things. Olympus is a camera manufacturer that had a long and storied history, and so when the Olympus O product was announced, it came out of nowhere. And when the Olympus O product was announced, it was a camera design that came out of nowhere. It was a camera that looked more appropriate in Star Wars, Star Trek, or Blade Runner. The camera was manufactured mostly out of brushed aluminum and had a very boxy kind of square form factor. So take a look at that. The camera had an external flash that mounted on an arm, just like one of those old camera flashes that you would have seen back in the 1920s. Yeah, really weird design choice, but I see why they didn't want to put a hot shoe on the top of the camera or cold shoe and screw up the aesthetic. The camera also had a number of other curious details. If you look at the back of the camera says on it, inscribed, aluminum body, AD 1988, Tokyo, Japan. We don't want anybody getting confused and thinking this camera was designed in BC. And you can look at the faceplate of the camera and see that there are a lot of circles. It looks like the Lot digital camera design that came out a few years ago with all of its many cameras on the front. But all those little circles were kind of a strange aesthetic choice, but they all served a purpose. One of which in the center is the lens, obviously. The other one is a viewfinder, and then there are also some other circular designs on the outside of the camera. A few quirks of the camera, despite its really high build quality and rather avant-garde presentation, the camera had some very mid specs. You could have any shutter speed you wanted, as long as it fell between 1/45 of a second and 1/400th, very narrow range. And then also the maximum aperture on the camera was an f3.5. So for a prime lens, it's relatively slow. The other camera that we talked about had a variable aperture and a much slower speed, but that was also a zoom lens. f3.5 for a prime lens, not so great. But even more bizarrely perhaps was not that it opened up only to an f3.5, but that it only closed down to an f9. So you didn't have the ability with the camera to scrub a lot of extra light if you had it. And coupled with the very narrow shutter speed range, the camera could really catch you out if you weren't careful. All in all though, I think the Olympus O product design looks great even if the specs were pretty mid. But there's another weird camera from the 80s. Now we're getting to perhaps my favorite camera on the list, and I like to think of this camera as the film camera that Darth Vader would have chose if he were in the market to capture his sweet, sweet memories with Padme on his 35mm film. Got way nerdy there for a second. Sorry. Very bulbous, very plastic, a black aesthetic design all across the camera. Really cool. Honestly, I think it looks great. I love that camera manufacturers were willing to take chances like this, but this is called the Konica AI Borg, or iBorg. A couple of common complaints with the camera. Most folks think it looks rather ugly. I'm not included in that number. I think it looks okay, but most folks don't like the design. The other thing about it, all plastic construction. That would be the thing that really put me off of the camera, but it is all plastic construction. As you can see, this thing was injection molded all the way through, every piece on it. Very, very plasticky. And to make matters worse, the really weird, obtuse design also made for strange ergonomics and made it difficult to handle. Strange button placements and weird camera controls abounded with the Konica AI Borg. The top plate of the AI Borg contained an LCD that I can only assume was provided by Tiger Electronics. There were some interesting features included in the AI Borg though. You could find a number of cool features. It had a burst mode, an interesting knot mode, a double exposure mode, and a bulb mode. Funny little quirk with the bulb mode is that it could go from 1 second to as long as 100 hours for those really, really dark situations that Vader may have found himself in. The lens on the camera is a 35 to 105mm zoom lens, and the optical quality of the lens was reportedly pretty good. And these days, you can get your very own Konica AI Borg from eBay for anywhere between $100 and $200. They aren't all that pricey. The next camera on the list looks like something from a James Bond movie. That should probably come as no surprise, given that the camera manufacturer was Zenit. I can only imagine what the mood room looked like when they were coming up with the design for the Zenit Photo Sniper. Vodka, gunpowder, lead, guns, missiles. And this is the only camera on this list with as much testosterone as the Macho Man Randy Savage. And incidentally, the only camera on the list with a pistol grip. The camera also included a shoulder stock for extra stability. Look at that for innovation. You don't have to bring a monopod. Just pull the camera up, prop it up against your shoulder, and get super, super sharp images. And you're gonna need the stabilization from the shoulder stock as well, because the lens that came with this camera was a 300mm f4.5 lens. So you're getting super, super long range zoomed in images with the Zenit Photo Sniper. I guess it stands to reason, the name being sniper, that you would want to be some distance away. And the surprising thing with the Zenit Photo Sniper was they actually made a number of versions of this camera. So the camera actually came in a kit, right, with a number of accessories and different lenses. It came with a Helios 44, and the camera also came with a 300mm f4.5 lens. The lens that perhaps helped the camera earn its name, the Photo Sniper, right? Pull the trigger, which is surprisingly how you actuated the camera. It did have a trigger, and that's how you took your pictures. Weird, very, very weird. I'm just imagining you in the year of 2023 walking up to a police officer taking a picture of something, and you just getting shot on sight for using this camera. I do think this camera perhaps needs to make a comeback though. I think it's a very cool way to maybe market film photography to the gun bros, you know what I'm saying? I think the camera represents an interesting way we could perhaps make film photography branch into a new market, right? The guys who have big trucks and like to collect guns and stuff. That brings me to the last camera on the list, and certainly the least, because this is the smallest camera in the world. The Guinness Book of World Records calls the Sakura Pedal the smallest film camera ever made. I don't know, can't independently verify, but if that's what Guinness says, let's go with that. The camera has a diameter of 12mm and has an f5.6 lens. And what's really interesting about the Sakura Pedal, the camera actually took 6 round images on a piece of cut film that you would insert into the camera and have to load, obviously in complete darkness. You could actually buy a separate film cutter to cut your own film discs for the Sakura Pedal, or you could buy them prepackaged. When the camera was produced, it came in a lovely wood box in Japan and instructions printed on a piece of rice paper. The camera only had 2 shutter speeds and was roughly the size of a quarter. So really cool camera. I looked and looked on the internet. I couldn't find any images produced with the Sakura Pedal, and it looks like unfortunately we probably won't be testing this camera and using it on our own, as these little cameras can cost as much as $2,000. At least looking through eBay, that's what I found. So the Sakura Pedal, a really cool camera, the world's smallest film camera, but unfortunately prohibitively expensive for what you're getting for it. But let me know in the comments what your favorite weird cameras are that I perhaps didn't mention. And speaking of cameras that are not so weird, check out this video I made reviewing the Contax G1. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching.